At the end of episode 9, humanity was no longer constrained by reality. Bodies became optional. Time became adjustable. Scarcity became a setting. Truth fragmented into local systems. Even consequence became a matter of design. The world stopped enforcing itself, and survival stopped being compulsory. But one constraint remained: the self. Even in a post-reality civilization, identity still carried inertia. Emotional tendencies persisted, habits lingered, trauma echoed, memory shaped reaction. You could choose your environment, your timeline, your difficulty level, but you still inhabited a particular pattern of consciousness. That pattern was the final limit, the final friction, the final piece of reality that had not yet been redesigned. And once humanity realizes that personality itself can be modified, edited, and refined, the last external boundary dissolves inward. The future no longer asks what world you want to live in. It asks what kind of being you want to become. If the self is the last constraint, personality becomes the next interface. For most of human history, personality was something discovered slowly. You learned your temperament through failure. You encountered your limits through conflict. You uncovered your strengths through repetition and resistance. Identity emerged from friction with the world. But once reality itself becomes adjustable, friction loses authority. And without friction, personality no longer needs to be endured. It can be configured. Traits that once felt permanent begin to appear as editable parameters. Emotional intensity can be softened. Anxiety can be dampened. Motivation can be amplified. Empathy can be expanded or selectively tuned. The self becomes legible, not mysterious, but modular. At first, these adjustments feel therapeutic. Corrections, improvements, relief from unnecessary suffering. But the moment personality becomes visible as a system, it stops being sacred. It becomes editable. And once personality is treated as a design interface rather than a lived inheritance, the question shifts from "who am I?" to "which version works best?" When personality becomes editable, the first changes are rarely ambitious. They are protective. Fear is reduced. Anxiety is softened. Traumatic memory is buffered. Shame is muted. Emotional spikes are leveled out to prevent instability. The edits are framed as healing necessary corrections to biological imperfections. And in many ways, they are. Suffering that once lingered for decades can be eased in minutes. Harmful reflexes can be recalibrated. Destructive patterns can be neutralized before they cascade into consequences. But discomfort was never just damage. It was information. Fear signaled danger. Shame signaled misalignment. Grief signaled attachment. Anxiety signaled uncertainty. These emotions were heavy, but they were directional. They shaped behavior. They sharpened judgment. They created depth. When discomfort is edited out, feedback weakens. You become calmer, more stable, less reactive, but also less interrupted. And interruption was often where growth began. The self becomes smoother but also quieter in ways that are harder to measure. Once personality can be modified, improvement does not remain private. It becomes visible. Optimized emotional regulation produces measurable outcomes. Enhanced focus increases productivity. Tuned empathy improves negotiation. Reduced fear improves risk tolerance. Traits begin to correlate with performance. And performance can be ranked. Platforms emerge offering certified personality upgrades, verified configurations, recommended emotional profiles for leadership, creativity, parenting, diplomacy. The language shifts from healing to enhancement. You are no longer simply editing yourself. You are upgrading. And upgrades invite comparison. certain configurations begin to dominate, not because they are morally superior, but because they function more efficiently within complex systems. Calm replaces volatility. Strategic detachment replaces emotional intensity. Optimized ambition replaces uncertainty. The self becomes competitive. And one's personality exists inside a marketplace of improvement. Identity stops being a quiet, internal process. It becomes economic. Markets create hierarchies. Once personality upgrades become measurable, identity begins to stratify. Emotional regulation scores, focus indices, empathy calibration levels, social influence, efficiency. These metrics do not appear coercive at first. They appear informative. But information shapes behavior. Optimized individuals perform better in collaborative systems. They negotiate more effectively. They adapt faster. They experience fewer destabilizing emotional swings. And over time, systems begin to prefer them. Unedited selves are not banned. They are simply outperformed. This is not discrimination. It is optimization logic playing out at scale. Institutions lean toward reliability. Networks lean toward stability. Partnerships lean toward predictability. And gradually, being unoptimized becomes a disadvantage. Identity is no longer just personal. It is strategic. And once identity enters competition, self-modification stops feeling like an option. It begins to feel like maintenance, the cost of staying relevant in a world that measures everything. Competition produces convergence. As certain personality configurations consistently outperform others, emotional diversity begins to compress. Extremes are filtered out. Volatility is discouraged. Unpredictability becomes inefficient. The result is not uniformity by force. It is uniformity by preference. Systems reward stability. Networks reward consistency. Institutions reward emotional reliability. And over time, the range of acceptable inner experience begins to narrow not through law, but through optimization. Anger becomes rare. Deep melancholy becomes optional. Obsession becomes impractical. Even ecstatic intensity begins to feel disruptive in environments built for seamless coordination. People do not lose emotion. They lose range. The human emotional spectrum, once chaotic and expansive, becomes tuned for compatibility. Fewer spikes, fewer ruptures, fewer collisions. And while society becomes smoother, something quieter happens beneath it. Difference starts to feel inefficient. As emotional variance narrows, identity becomes curated. People no longer merely optimize for stability. They begin selecting complete experiential profiles, pre-balanced combinations of temperament, motivation, relational style, and cognitive rhythm. These profiles are not imposed, they are chosen. Curated consciousness emerges. Some configurations are designed for leadership, others for creativity, others for long-term relational harmony. Entire emotional ecosystems are packaged as coherent selves, stable, efficient, internally aligned. It feels liberating. No more years spent discovering who you are through friction and uncertainty. No more stumbling into patterns you do not understand. Identity becomes intentional from the start. But curation replaces discovery. The self is no longer revealed through struggle. It is assembled through preference. And preference, over time, tends toward comfort. Consciousness becomes beautiful, balanced, and predictable. But unpredictability was once where originality lived. Not everyone accepts curation. As optimized profiles spread and emotional balance becomes the norm, a minority begins to resist. They refuse presets. They decline calibration. They keep their volatility, their doubt, their uneven emotional rhythms. They choose friction. To them, unpredictability is not a flaw. It is proof of depth. Anxiety is not merely instability. It is alertness. Grief is not malfunction. It is attachment. Obsession is not inefficiency. It is intensity. They argue that meaning was never born from symmetry. It was born from imbalance. In a world that values smoothness, the unoptimized feel heavy, slower, more difficult to coordinate, but they are also harder to predict and harder to standardize. Refusal becomes a philosophical position, not anti-technology, not anti-progress, but pro-friction. And as curated consciousness becomes dominant, the unedited self begins to look less like an oversight and more like a statement. Refusal does not stop optimization. It simply creates contrast. As curated consciousness becomes dominant, society begins to sort itself along new lines, not by wealth, not by geography, not even by ideology, but by self-modification. Optimized individuals cluster in systems built for precision and coordination. Their emotional range is calibrated for stability. Their reactions are predictable. Their collaboration frictionless. Institutions gravitate toward them because they reduce volatility. Unedited individuals form different networks. Their emotional depth is irregular, their decision-making less predictable, their interactions more intense. They value spontaneity over symmetry, experience over efficiency. The divide is not hostile. It is experiential. Each group perceives the other as incomplete. The optimized see instability. The unedited see emptiness. Neither side is entirely wrong. And for the first time in history, humanity is no longer divided by belief or territory. It is divided by how much of itself it has chosen to redesign. Authenticity once meant alignment. Your emotions were not chosen. Your temperament was not assembled. Your reactions were not curated for effect. To be authentic meant that what you felt arose naturally from who you were, not from a configuration menu. But when personality becomes editable, authenticity loses its anchor. If empathy can be amplified at will, is it still sincere? If calm can be installed, is it still earned? If emotional intensity can be dialed in for specific moments, does expression still reveal anything real? The problem is not deception. It is intention. When identity is constructed through selection, every trait becomes deliberate. Even vulnerability can be configured. Even spontaneity can be programmed. The boundary between genuine and optimized dissolves. Authenticity stops being a condition of being. It becomes a style of presentation. And once authenticity becomes aesthetic rather than inherent, trust begins to erode in subtle ways. Not because people are lying, but because no one is sure what is unedited anymore. Optimization promises improvement, smoother emotions, greater stability, fewer destructive impulses, higher performance across complex systems. In measurable terms, humanity becomes safer, calmer, more efficient. But the traits most easily removed are often the ones that once disrupted the status quo. Obsession drove breakthroughs. Rage fueled resistance. Grief deepened empathy. Doubt forced introspection. The human edge was never stable. It was jagged. When personality is engineered for harmony, volatility becomes undesirable. And when volatility disappears, so does unpredictability. The sharp emotional ruptures that once forced transformation become rare. Society grows quieter, more coordinated, more balanced, less extreme, but also less dangerous in the way that once produced radical change. The question is not whether optimization improves individual well-being. It is whether a species that designs away its extremes can still generate profound evolution. Because the same edges that cut were the ones that carved. For most of history, the soul was assumed to be discovered. It emerged from biology, memory, culture, and friction. It was shaped by what you endured, not what you selected. You did not design your inner world. You lived inside it and gradually learned its shape. But in the age of self-designed souls, inheritance gives way to intention. If personality can be edited, emotion calibrated, identity curated, then the soul stops being something found. It becomes something chosen. Chosen traits, chosen limits, chosen volatility, or chosen calm. The self becomes less like an artifact of circumstance and more like a declaration of preference. Not who you happen to become, but who you decided to remain. The question is no longer whether humanity will change. It is whether it will preserve friction inside that change. Because a soul that is fully optimized may be stable, efficient, and peaceful. But a soul that still carries tension may be capable of depth. And in a future where nothing about the self is fixed, the soul will not be what survives by accident. It will be what we repeatedly choose to keep.